Hello and welcome to the Communicative Leader, hosted by me, Dr. Leah OH. My friends call me Dr. O. I'm a professor of communication and a leadership communication expert. On the Communicative Leader, we're working to make your work life what you want it to be.
So Sue, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really excited for our conversation. I appreciate the work that you do, and I can't wait to learn more. And so one thing I wanted to start when I was preparing for our conversation, you talk about helping leaders face, name, and solve friction in their business. This is so important. And from a communication standpoint, why is the naming part, giving that label to a vague problem, why is that so difficult for most folks?
That's a great question, Dr. Leah. Should I call you Dr. Leah?
Oh, you can just call me Leah.
Leah?
Thank you.
Even though, it's respectful. You
It
work
is,
hard
but
for that, darn it.
Yep.
Solving issues the first time they come up fast and permanently and making them go away forever, that is the biggest epidemic problem in business because we tend to divert. So being able to name things, how you face it, it's part of being able to name what the actual issue is because often I work in the EOS methodology. And for the listeners, if you're not familiar with EOS, it's the Entrepreneurial Operating System. And the methodology is identify, discuss, solve. So this 3-step process is largely what the book Issues is about. And so just background context. But being able to name what it is and to look someone in the eye in the meeting you're in and talk about it could be between you and I, Leah. It could be between us, my team and your team. It could be a process we have that's not working. Those are sometimes really difficult things. And I think what it calls into question for most of us as human beings who love and care for one another, we end up going, well, if I tell you the truth, our relationship might actually be at stake here.
Yeah.
And I think unconsciously, that's what we're reacting to. So we tend to couch it, veil it, maybe polish it up a bit more than we do, dance around it. Maybe we don't even know what the root really is, the actual issue.
Yeah.
And so I worry if I tell you the truth, this could go bad. It's in all the difficult conversations, feedback, performance reviews, all of those things. But weekly meetings in particular, for most teams, if they're not running on EOS or some systemic kind of operating system, they avoid hard things. That's human.
Yep. And the irony is that when you skirt around it, you're usually doing more damage to the relationship and the project than if we just said, I'm going to speak freely. We might have to clean this up. But
%. You nailed it. It becomes an anchor on the business, on the team, on what we're up to. And it causes problems then, not issues. We want to talk about them before they become significant.
Exactly. And so you mentioned telling the truth. And I know that, Sue, you've earned the reputation of a truth teller. And I love this. And I'm wondering, in your experience, how can a leader communicate radical honesty, call out what others tiptoe around, but without damaging psychological safety? Or I think what many fear is they'll be labeled as critical or difficult.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot to unpack there. And in the truth teller domain, I don't always say things people like, which lends to other labels at times. And that's okay. So I would tell you candidly, having made plenty of mistakes myself and continuing to, it's a human experience. It just makes you normal if you struggle because this is a tightrope, right? You have identified probably one of the root things that we struggle with because I've failed a ton of times because it comes down to trust. When trust is really high in a relationship, meaning we've done our reps, we might have stepped on each other's toes, but we've come through that and we actually have gotten stronger because of it. You can make tons of mistakes. Think of all your best friends, your significant relationships, the coworker you go confide in after the meeting when you just need someone to commiserate with, which I don't condone. It's a meeting after the meeting, but those are the relationships where we've tripped over some things, but we've recovered. And so the very thing we fear is actually what makes you trust more. When trust is low, you have a really low bar, meaning I could screw up once, I could say the wrong thing, do the wrong thing, and bam, we go from 0 to 100. And all of a sudden we're damaging the relationship and we don't have that permission. So it is, and for some people it is earned, for some people it is assumed, and you have to know where you are on that continuum with whoever you are. So relationship and trust, again, a lot to unpack in there. But what I find works with everyone is a powerful question rather than a statement. If you can ask great questions, they are the most unearthing and unnerving thing because they suggest curiosity rather than certainty.
Yeah.
You got to be
Yes.
vulnerable.
Yes. I love that. Exactly. Sue, you said so many insightful things. I love that idea of trust on the continuum and that quick check-in. Am I still earning it, or are we at a point where it's assumed now? That's so helpful. And I agree with you that questions, I work with a lot of folks who are really introverted and they're like, I can never be a leader because my last book was Amplifying Your Leadership Voice. I'm like, start with questions. That's one of the best ways where you can be a powerful participant, but it doesn't feel like you're putting out an opinion that could be shot down.
Right. Great advice. Absolutely where I would start as well. Questions. You can never do too much of that either. Too many of us make too many statements.
Yeah, exactly. So let's think about accountability now. And this is something I know that a lot of employees in particular, they hear that word and then they think it's punishment. Like you need to be accountable for this. So Sue, I'm wondering, how can you coach leaders to kind of re-narrate accountability as kind of a supportive, winning culture rather than one that's disciplinary in nature?
You know, it's interesting because accountability gets a bad rap exactly as you've talked about it. It really does. And the whole world, like in business, we make a series of promises, requests, and agreements, right? That's all a business is a consolidation of those things. And so if we aren't promising and delivering, the business goes out of business. And so in a context of true accountability, it's really backing up to, do we have clear expectations? Is everyone in agreement about that? And do we know what great looks like? If we are aligned, then it's simply a check and balance of, did it happen or not? And if not, are we measuring ahead of the curve so you can change behavior and feel like you are a co-contributor to it? And I find the biggest mismatch is probably the word I'm looking for with accountability is the expectations weren't clear in the first part. So it feels like punishment when people inquire. So we have to do a better job of checking for understanding. We have to have conversations ahead of time. So there's no surprises. Nobody should be like, what do you mean I'm being measured on that? Having regular conversations to true up and say, hey, Leah, we agreed to do X, Y, and Z. How are you feeling about? Do you think it's going well? I'm looking at this and this. What do you think about that? Because it lets you into the understanding of the person doing the work. They're doing what makes sense to them. And so to me, it's being able to intervene in real time before you get to an outcome. And I think too often leaders are, I'm going to say lazy to a degree, where black and white stuff like numbers and what we call rocks or objectives that are met or not, it's too late. It's too late. By the time I'm going, you didn't get that done, people are going, well, why didn't you tell me 6 weeks ago while I was doing all these things I thought were right? And the mismatch is more around expectations and what great looks like. So we argue over effort versus the results, and it becomes like a deficit on ownership because it was never instilled.
Yeah, you're right. When you were giving us that really thoughtful response, I was thinking about how much of this really is a failure of leadership and the ability to communicate clearly. And then unfortunately, that often is harbored by the employee, right? They're the ones who then are standing there not meeting this deadline or didn't know they were expected to do A, B, or C. And I think that's why so many folks then accountability comes up and it just feels like I'm in trouble again.
Yeah. And it shouldn't be trouble. It should be, here's the outcome. That's what I'm being paid for. I'm clear what great looks like. You're clear what greats looks like. We're a team. How do we help each other? How do I let you know when I'm stuck or when I'm doing the effort, but I'm not getting the result. How can you help? That's what leaders are for.
Yeah, exactly. And so let's continue with that idea of greatness. And
Yeah.
so I know, Sue, your new book, it focuses on removing that friction to ignite greatness. And when a team is spinning but not solving, what is a common communicative habit that's keeping them stuck in that loop where they're just not able to gain traction?
Well, I think you identified it in our first question, candidly. You know, not identifying and saying, here's what I'm trying to solve, here's what it is, and being able truly to get to the root, not a bunch of symptoms. And you get in a doom loop of discussion. So in the IDS model with EOS, it's identify, discuss, solve. The one skill people are great at is discussion, which is why we hate meetings.
Yep.
We don't identify much. We don't solve a lot. And so we come back to it and then we're frustrated.
Yes.
So that identification is probably the most neglected and elusive, how to name it. Back to that earlier question, how do you say it in a clean sentence? How can I look you in the eye as a teammate and say, hey, this isn't working between us. What do you need from me and how could I help? Or what do you need to do differently? Here's where we're going and there's a gap. That's simply like being a good teammate. Does it feel good in the moment? No, but it sure as heck feels awful when we miss.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. When you're saying that, I'm smiling because I think everyone listening can identify with like, haven't we had this conversation in a meeting? Like, didn't we do this last month or last year? Like, you just feel like it's Groundhog's Day. And you're right, because we've never clearly identified. So we just keep going around and around and around.
Right. And then we expect different results. And I think they call that insanity, right, Leah?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So let's think about what happens when we have growth, which I think is what we're striving for. But a lot of times we're not quite ready for the chaos that comes along with it. So I'm wondering, how does a leader's communication need to evolve as they move from maybe this scrappy startup mindset to more of a disciplined EOS driven framework?
Well, it's a great question because it's messy. To your point, as you grow, it gets more complex. And we have 5 leadership abilities that we talk about that you have to master to truly be able to grow and scale. Number 1, you have to be able to simplify. As crazy as it sounds, as it gets more complex, leaders need to simplify communication to one great question, one great theme, one great message, because there's too many distractions. That grounds people. Second thing they have to do, they have to delegate. You have to be able to let go to grow. That is easier said than done because most of us get a great dopamine hit every time we do something well, and we are darn competent people. So what makes you a leader is high competency. But what sustains and grows a business is producing leaders who produce leaders, which is now teamwork. And most leaders are not great team players. The third thing is the ability to predict, that we build a system and a structure to help us manage and predict well, which comes back to having numbers and metrics and process to predict well, which includes systemization, which is the fourth thing. How do we get some structure to have consistency beyond personality? Because when you're smaller, it can be driven by a leader, but we have to replicate. Then last but not least is structure itself. Do you have the right structure in your organization to thrive? And all of that's baked into a lather, rinse, repeat. You have to revisit those repeatedly to keep scaling because you're solving issues you've never had before.
Yeah. And Sue, you just gave us this beautiful example of, you know, this complex thinking, this framework that you've created, but how you have spent the time and energy into thinking about how to make it simple for readers, for listeners. And that's not easy to do. It is very, very challenging.
Yes, ma'am.
Take
simple is
that
not
complex.
easy.
Yes, exactly. And so that was a beautiful example of it, because I think so much of our society has long praised this complexity of thought, and we're not saying that should go away. It's certainly not the takeaway, but you've leveled up when you're able to simplify it and frame it in a way where it can be easily communicated by others.
Yeah, I think it also is counterintuitive for most leaders, right? We're going with that complexity instead of you have to fight the grain a little bit, as you just described.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that was one of the, I think educators know that lesson well, right?
Yeah,
So it's
for
something you have to stop
sure.
and say, I need to know I need to know it well enough to make it simple enough for everyone to understand it in this
Right,
classroom.
right.
Yeah.
Hard to do though.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. So graceful toughness. I love that you do this, Sue. So one of your core values is gracefully working through the tough stuff.
Yep.
And I'm wondering, what does that look like in a heated meeting? And then the second part of that question is, how do you maintain your warmth or connection while holding a hard line for
Mhm.
performance, for values?
Well, again, great questions, Leah. You made me think a
Thank
lot as
you.
I'm doing this. So I'm
Good.
coming back to hard questions. So the
Yeah.
questions are less open-ended and more targeted, but we're still humans doing the work. And I like to use the phrase hard on issues, soft on people. So we have to
I like that.
depersonalize it. And instead of having the issue between us, we put it in front of us, meaning you and I, let's unite, but let's attack that thing over there. And that's
Yeah.
a subtle set of things, but they're hard
Yeah.
questions like what needs to change so we win at what we're up with. And again, it's a we, not a you. I think
Yep.
oftentimes the blame comes in just based on how we ask, like, Leah, what are you doing and not doing? What's working
Yeah.
and not working? Like you're performing and responding to me as your leader, but really being curious about what don't I know? This doesn't make
Yeah.
sense. This isn't working. What don't we know? Because I'm looking at certain data, you're looking at certain data and feelings and experiences, and you have to
Yep.
care greatly, but challenge directly. So we can't tiptoe around
Yep.
it. We have to say, hey, look, our results are failing right now. How do we approach this together? And Jill Young, the co-author on this, she's got this great question she's been marinating in, and we've been doing some podcasting and things. And this question is, until the question is asked, the answer can't appear. So if we don't ask great questions of what's between us, not what do I know and I'm right about and what do you know and you're right, that between us stuff won't heal it fast and permanently. So I don't have a hard answer because there's no formula for this.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's really thoughtful. And I really like that question your co-author surfaced is this idea that we're not going to make decisions based on assumptions because that gets everyone in trouble.
Right, right. And can we trust? Sure, but we need to verify. And it's that adage from Ronald Reagan that you have to come back to and go, I want a little data because feelings won't help us in these tough conversations as much as we'd like.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and the data can help us keep it focused on the issue.
Yep.
Right? And
Not
away
the
from the
person.
people, like you said.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
So let's talk about your zero waste commitment. And when I was preparing for our conversation, I love this, the zero waste commitment regarding time and energy. And how do you suggest leaders perform these audits on meeting structures to ensure they aren't wasting collective energy of their team?
It's this. I'll give you a couple of really good bullets. They come from a great boss workshop that I lead. And Dan Sullivan, who I study with from Strategic Coach, has this great premise that time unlocks all freedoms, meaning relationships, money, purpose. And so how much time and how well you use it is really where it all begins. So doing a quarterly meeting audit, meaning taking your physical calendar, printing it out, yes, paper for all of you, or digitally on a Remarkable or a tablet of some sort, and identifying, are there any patterns and trends of meetings where I didn't need to be there? It was who didn't need to be there? How many of us have been in meetings? Meetings are the death of many of us, really, truly.
Yep.
But it's like there's 4 of us because the communication actually isn't strong enough from the leader or the point person to cascade it well enough so we stack it with more people so everybody hears it, which actually makes the meetings worse and less effective. So doing an audit and then looking at all communication methods like Slack, email, in-person phone calls, whatever, Zoom meetings, however you meet, however you talk, do some guidelines because all of us defer to our preference. Texting, it's not someone else's preference, and it may not be the right medium for what you're trying to communicate. So does there need to be some guardrails or guidelines of what we use for when? And too often we take that for granted, or it changes. So doing an audit quarterly will have discipline, which you use that word with the accountability, and discipline's a great thing, not a bad thing. About your time starts to free your time, and the opportunities start to multiply. Taking a clarity break, what we call a clarity break in EOS, to think and prioritize, needs to be done weekly for most leaders to be at their best. Not my thing, that's every leader's thing. So what's my highest and best use? And am I spending enough of my time there? Primo question for us all to always be evaluating.
Exactly. And I think, you know, we've talked a lot about how some of these things are counterintuitive, because I think for many leaders, I'm too busy to reflect. I'm too busy to integrate that.
Yes.
And you're like, you need it the most. That's your response. Then we know that it needs to happen.
There's a Buddhist proverb, I believe it is, that you just said in different language, which is, I'm so busy today, I'll have to meditate twice as much.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that is when we need it.
100%. Yeah, and that's so helpful. And I think it's those things that, like you're saying, they really can transform you as an individual, as a leader, but as a partner, as a parent, you know, in all those iterations, instead of just going on autopilot.
Absolutely. 100% true. Everywhere.
Yeah.
Could never get better.
Exactly.
No autopilot we're trying to interrupt that.
Exactly. And so another thing you do that I really love is you mentioned leading with humor, and just enough to make it stick. So I'm wondering, you know, in high stakes environments, how do you suggest a leader use humor? Because it can be a strategic tool to de-escalate tension and increase stickiness of their message. What do you recommend around those guidelines?
Well, similarly, Leah, I would tell you it's all about timing, because an ill-timed joke is not well received. If you haven't done it, I certainly have. And so the room has to be ready.
Yeah.
And it has to be when there's a little bit of a decrescendo of emotion. So you can't do it right at the height of a sticky subject. I'll just say, pay attention to timing. I have failed at this because I think I'm there. But when I'm leading, I often throw myself under the bus first, and I'll say, you know, when I'm teaching the visionary or the integrator masterclass, and again, for those who may or may not know EOS, that's the founder typically is the visionary, and the integrator is like the president or the chief operating officer of the organization. And, you know, I'll say the integrator has a thankless job, and I'll say, you know, they're a little dead inside. And it gets a laugh because they very much are the inflictor and absorber of pain. And even though that doesn't sound attractive, they relate to it, and they go, oh I am kind of dead, because I hear no, I have to say no, and I have to be the bad guy. Or the visionaries are these people who have 2,000 ideas a minute. And I'll say, of which maybe one is worthwhile a month. And so that truth telling and giving people a little bit of a metaphor or a laugh makes it stickier. But you have to be sensitive to it, and you have to be relating to it as something you do too.
Yeah. And I think too, there's a way that, you know, going back to naming, as you've said, and as your work, as you focus on, when we're acknowledging those parts of these roles, it can be so freeing where it's not just me.
Right. You're normal. That's the thing. If you have issues and you're growing, you're normal.
Yeah.
100%.
So helpful. Excellent. So, Sue, I have two final questions for you, which I'm so sad because I'm having so much fun in our conversation. This is the way we end all episodes of the Communicative Leader, and these two questions go hand in hand. And the first part is, you know, advice for our titled leaders, our managers, directors, supervisors. What is it you want to leave them with, whether it's a tip, a challenge, advice? And then the second part is advice for employees of all ranks.
Oh, good questions all over the place. So I would tell anyone at a leadership table, truth telling here, pressure's the price you pay to sit there. So the days when it seems to be too much, take a breath, go for a walk, but know that that's what you signed up for. If you feel like a firefighter, it's because you've created arsonists. One of my fellow implementers said that, and I went, I feel that a little bit. You know, we get so addicted to being the most necessary person because we're highly competent people if we're in a leadership seat.
Yeah.
And we have to forego the dopamine hit of having all the answers to grow leaders who grow leaders. If that doesn't show up, not just with those who support you, but the people who support them, you're not there yet. Keep going. Because having helpers feels very much different than when you truly have a succession plan baked in. So we can ask questions, learn to delegate, take ourselves a little less seriously, and stop being that bottleneck. We will lead way better. And I think for those aspiring to that and in that high potential or supportive role, ask for it. Slap the hand of the person ahead of you. Be a little more willing to say, hey, is that my accountability or yours? Because asking questions like that when a leader is stepping in because they're trying to help in a way that's really not offering autonomy, that's where I think it can be a two-way street.
Yeah. Yep. And I love that. Is thinking too, I think there's so many folks who feel like it without the title position, their agency is limited. But by asking those questions, like you suggest, that's a way to know you're making an impact.
Yeah. We can never stop learning. That would be my end point on that is better emotional intelligence. You can work on it your whole life. I know I am. Ask more questions than statements. 4 to 1 is what's recommended.
Okay.
And that will
That's
increase.
good to know. That's a good, guide.
Yeah. And that's what great leadership looks like. I think, again, we have to learn to be uncomfortable, be comfortable being uncomfortable to solve issues fast and permanently the first time. It's not easy. And you will make mistakes. You're human. It's normal.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. Which is freeing and terrifying.
Exactly.
But recognizing that's just part of the process makes it a lot easier.
Yes, exactly.
Well, Sue, this has been a delight. I have written so many notes down in our conversation that I will return to. I will also never not think of a leader at the being a firefighter and creating arsonists, thinking about accountability and the environments that we create as a leader. So powerful. Thank you for sharing your time and expertise with us. I know this was so helpful for me. I know it'll be helpful for our listeners.
Leah, thank you so much for the great service that your podcast does and for all the work you do with all the people you touch. I am honored to have been here and I appreciate the opportunity. I loved being here.
Thank you.
All right, my friends, that wraps up our conversation today. Until next time, communicate with intention and lead with purpose. I'm looking forward to chatting with you again soon on the Communicative Leader.